Okay, so this game right here is one that's supposed to be released in a couple of months. So, like, towards the end of this summer on August 29th, we're supposed to be getting Sea of Stars, which is basically a retro based 2D RPG game, and it's going to be released across multiple game systems: the PS5, PS4, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, you name it. And pretty much like this game is one that looks really impressive because it looks similar to something you would see on SNES back in the early to mid 90s. You know, games like Illusion of Gaia, like Secret of Mana, Seiken Densetsu. Basically, those are the kind of vibes that I get when I look at this game. And it also has turn-based RPG gameplay, which was very popular back in the 90s. Nowadays, a lot of people are into 3D action RPGs, which are pretty cool, but it feels like there's been too many of those in this day and age. And honestly, I do feel that it's cool to have some variety in relation to gaming nowadays because I mean, like nowadays, video games, not all of them, but there's a fair share of video games in this day and age that don't really feel much like video games. It feels like 3D simulation, and at times it gets boring and all that stuff. But I think, like, the RPG genre, for the most part, it's been very popular within the past decade, even more so than first-person shooters. First-person shooters, I guess, to me, was more popular during the 2000s and even in the early teens to some extent. But it seems like within the past couple of years, people have really got into RPGs and action adventure games and all that. Sea of Stars has a pretty basic plot, and I do feel that, like, for the most part, this is something that video games is missing in this day and age. You had masterpieces that had like basic plots and had, I guess, like 2D like gameplay where I guess, it felt like, I know older video games back in the 90s felt like actual video games, 3D video games are cool, but I just feel like they don't really feel like video games. It feels like you're watching a movie or what have you. And I think that's cool if you're, a young adult or you're like a teenager and you're just into, T-rated, M-rated games that's about, blood and gore and violence and all that stuff. A game like Sea of Stars is obviously more family friendly and it's designed to appeal to just about everyone. And it makes me wonder how Sea of Stars is going to stand out on a console like the Xbox Series X, because the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5, I think it's easier for third-party games to stand out on those two consoles, especially Xbox Series X, because you look at PlayStation consoles. Like, you look at the PS4, the best-selling games were like Sony titles, like Marvel's Spider-Man and God of War, and then you recently just got God of War Ragnarok, which came out back in late 2022, and that's a game that everybody is talking about right now, and it's probably one of the most popular games on the PS5. But I do feel like a game like Sea of Stars would shine more on Steam or on Nintendo Switch, considering the fact that it's an indie game for the most part, and the fact that it will also appeal to a niche audience of gamers who grew up during that era of 2D, RPGs and all that. They would probably really appreciate it. Now, as far as sales is concerned, I'm not exactly sure. I'd be surprised if it broke 1 mil or 2 mil or what have you. And the reason I say that is because the game looks impressive, but at the same time, there's so many big releases that's coming out this year to a point where it could most likely get overshadowed. Now, if Sea of Stars was released last year, I could see it possibly being one of the best video games of 2022, or at least one of the best indie games of 2022. And I believe Sea of Stars was like first announced back in like the spring of 2020. So, yeah, I think the game got pushed back a couple of times to a point where, it may have ended up doing some harm, like, to, I guess, its overall anticipation and all that stuff. But at the same time, 2020 was considered to be a horrible year anyway. So maybe it was a blessing in disguise that we didn't get the game in 2020 or 2021 or what have you. Nowadays, I do feel like society's getting back to normal and more people are focusing on, I guess, their lives and trying to enjoy themselves and all that stuff. So I do feel like Sea of Stars definitely has the potential to be one of the best indie games of 2023. But at the same time, if this game came out last year, like in 2022, I'm almost certain that it most likely would be like the best, RPG game of that year. Now, the game has not come out yet. No one's really played it, but I'm just basically I'm just looking at the game and I guess like how it's presented and all that stuff. I'm very impressed by what it sees, and hopefully we have more indie, I guess, third party developers that decide to make games similar to this, because I honestly feel like 2D RPGs definitely need to make a return, because I do feel that it will make gaming more interesting once again.